think everyone in the world needs to pay attention to AI. It is such a disruptive force for all industries, especially any industry that relies on information. So I think we ignore AI at our peril, and also the rapid development of it and kind of the arms race, if you will, on how fast it's developing, how it's being adopted and integrated into different fields. But I do think there's a way to define where the human really needs to live. And that's when, our engineers are going out into classrooms, talking to teachers, seeing how they're using tools, experiencing what it's like to be in a special education environment. I think the way that it can be designed to retain friction. So the things that we ought not to outsource, and there's some really good articles out there about this kind of thing, which is we don't want to outsource memory, the idea of attention and being able to pay attention and to really think through things. And also that idea of challenging information in the moment.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the EduFuturist podcast. We are excited to be with a guest in the studio who is joining us from across the pond. We've had a few recently that have been joining us from across the pond, so it's exciting to be able to speak about that future education piece again with the guest in the studio. We'll introduce very, very soon. But Steve, I'm going to ask you briefly 3 words to describe your last 7 days.
Great.
I am great.
I was going to do Mrs. I'm great. But I was going to do Mrs. Doubtfire. I'm like, I am Job, the Robin Williams thing. But no, I am great. Yeah, the world is good.
Amazing.
It's full. The kids are in bed. I know we don't say what day it is, but the time of day. But the sun's still shining. It's beautiful. Yeah. It's lovely, man. But yeah, how about you, Ben?
Good, really good. It's nice to have some sunshine in the north of England. It doesn't happen very often, so we'll celebrate it where we can. And it's good to be in these conversations. When we're recording this, we won't tell you exactly what day because we always try and keep it a little bit secret. We're in that throes of the final parts of the roadshow. We've had some webinars, we've been all around the UK. And actually, we've just hopped over to the US of A to speak to our guest in the studio today. So we are looking forward to this one. Without further ado, Rob, could you just introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my name is Rob Wessman, and I am the VP of Ethics and Safety at School AI, which is a leading EdTech company. So my lens is to help us be safe and effective and secure and to grapple with all of those really interesting dilemmas that we have right now. And I'm just really pleased to be with you.
And quite new to role, Rob. You're going to say, no, I've been there for 10 years. That's absolutely fine if I've got it wrong in terms of the research. But what's your journey to VP look like? Has it been internally in the business or actually... What does that look like? Are you an educationalist? Me and Ben were both in education. I taught running, skipping and jumping. And Ben taught reading books, the book.
Make believe.
Yeah,
I was a religious studies teacher to give context.
How about you, Rob?
Yeah, so actually I come from a long education background. I was a high school teacher here in Utah for a number of years, 9 years, and then I went into school administration. From a school leadership lens, I went to Harvard's EdLD program, which is the Education Leadership Doctorate, which is this great program that brings in a cohort of 25 different people from all different kinds of industries. So you have philanthropists and policymakers and technologists and school leaders. So I did that for 3 years. And from there, I've been working on school system change and turnaround. And so this is a little bit of like fish out of water over the last 9 months. But I do have this lens of what is good for school and what is good for students as my driving kind of why. And it's interesting to play this role within this company because I can be the voice of thinking about the bigger picture of what's really good systemically and how we can lead in the space of doing what's right for kids.
That, and I know that Steve will definitely have an opinion on it, but I love the fact that you're working in an EdTech company, but you're not coming as just a programmer or a developer or somebody in a tech space. You've lived and breathed in the classroom. You've worked in leadership and worked systemically, and now you're transferring that into that role at School AI. And I know that the role has shifted recently, hasn't it, into looking after ethics and safety, and we are going to dig into what that looks like. I wonder if it's possible, just to dig back one step further before that about your education. We always try and dig into what their educations look like. And because a lot of people who become teachers or who work in education have got a real why, and either they had a great experience, a poor experience, or they're inspired by somebody. I wonder if you could go to that bit as your educational background before we jump into the roles that you're doing currently.
I love that question because it's kind of the historical lens of where you've been. I was a public school student all the way through in suburban Utah and then out to Washington State. So in just a different state within the United States that's a lot more rural, kind of with lumberjacks and folks doing kind of in the logging industry. Moved back to Utah and had this kind of tough transition of moving from school to school. I did well academically, but kind of felt lost a little bit as a student. Fortunately, I had wrestling as my kind of anchor. I was able to have great coaches and then English teachers that were just absolutely effective and found a real love of literature and pursued that as part of my college degree. And so just kind of this public school upbringing. I got into education a little bit kind of in the back end, though. I was not a certified teacher when I started. I was actually a paraprofessional wrestling coach and then was licensed after the fact when I really found this connection with leading and teaching students to learn in both physical activities and then also with English and literature later.
You keep mentioning Utah, but is it, and I'm going to get this really badly wrong, and you're going to go, no. Isn't Utah renowned for, like, is it the Mighty Five or something in terms of the parks? I'm sure
Yes.
it's...
Yes. The southern Utah parks, Zions and
Yeah, I'm
Arches
going to say
and
Zion. And, yeah,
all of these
Zion.
these fabulous red rock locations. It's been really great to be here and to travel those areas for sure.
I'm glad I got it right. But or you might just be making up and somebody else has gone, it just humoured you because he didn't want to make you look like a tool on the call. Well, that's absolutely fine as well. So coaching, I think you're stepping into that actually, and as we go in, we will talk about school AI, we will talk about the future of education and AI, but actually coaching, I was in PE, physical education, phys ed, but ultimately I coached for such a long period of time. Football, soccer was kind of my thing in terms of all of those. But ultimately, I think in terms of leadership, playing sports is really, really key in terms of that dynamic, especially team sports, but also coaching young people in terms of your wrestling bit of actually trying to drive and get the best out of people in performance and move them forward rather than actually always showing and doing it themselves is quite a key attribute in terms of any leadership, whether that's of learners, whether that's of in school, whether that's in an EdTech company. Do you feel that's played a featuring part and a role?
Yeah, I think it opens your eyes to the different kinds of learning, their experiential learning and like hands-on kinesthetic kinds of learning, in addition to the more traditional expressions of education in the classroom. Having different types of educational engagement can draw in different students in different ways. But ultimately, I think and perhaps it's a little ironic, but I think that the human connection in education is paramount. And so as we look at these technologies, one of the big concerns I have is that they are actually interfering with human connection. And so can we drive at ways of actually reinforcing that and creating good ways for people to interact with each other in a learning context?
I suppose that really takes us nicely into telling us a little bit about your role and School AI. So as most people who are listening to this will, unless they've lived under a rock for a period of time, will have heard of the great work that School AI is doing. I know that primarily, I know it's not always, but primarily it's been US based, and a lot of our US listeners will be really familiar in that space. But I know you're a global organization as well, and many of our listeners in the UK and beyond will be familiar with the great work you're doing. We have some good friends who talk really, really highly about what School AI does. Could you, first of all, maybe dig into who School AI is and maybe how it's shaping that conversation about education and maybe the future there?
Absolutely. So School AI, if you kind of turn back the clock just a few years, because all of these AI companies are kind of emerging, as we go. But School AI was created yes, as a teacher tool, kind of shortcut for, generating lesson plans and producing special education plans and a whole bunch of other kinds of tools just for efficiency. But at the same time, back in this is 2023, the founders saw this need and opportunity, I would say, for students to interact in spaces that were learning focused, but also differentiated to their needs. Using AI through chat first, but then also through another number of other ways, can there be an interaction that does tutoring, that does scaffolding for students at different levels, that takes a teacher's designed activity and allows for personalization at scale? And so the heart and soul of School AI is this interaction between student, teacher, and content in a way that really produces the kind of cognitive thinking, the kind of critical thinking that we hope to see with students and that keep humans in the loop.
Yeah, and I love that role. I think you're talking about the product and everything else, but actually, as you innovate, I worked in the EdTech space for a period, as many of the listeners will know. But ultimately, a lot of innovation in a lot of EdTech, especially AI, is new features. And it's like brilliant, but that's not really innovation. That's not necessarily taking things forward. That's just substitution and an add-on. Brilliant, but that side of innovation and the roadmap of actually what you want to build and that and the vision. But what's really interesting in terms of your role is me and Ben. Was it last year, Ben, in terms of the trends, in terms of agency with Guardrails? And ultimately, I think that really kind of, I don't want to say it, but your role should be VP of agency with Guardrails. That ultimately, innovation is great, but ultimately, there has to be those checks and balances in terms of safety and also ethics in terms of we step in. That yes, we want to take risks. Yes, we want to move things forward and push the boundaries. But at the same point, you don't want to not risk anything, but you don't want to risk too much. So what does that look like? Does that kind of sum up the role? Have I just done a great job of doing it in 2 sentences? Or actually, is it greater than that in terms of the work that you do on a day-to-day and a week-to-week?
Yeah, I think you're speaking to kind of the safety guardrails, right? Which is ensuring that when a student's interaction with a chatbot is happening, that it is both identifying problems, alerting to concerning behaviors, that it's like a safe place for students to learn. And our technology does all of that. It screens in the moment when a student expresses something like, the feelings of hopelessness or whatever the kinds of things that students may have in open interactions with LLMs that would not be routed back to the adult in the room in other kind of frontier models of AI, like a ChatGPT or a Claude or something like that. That's part of it. And I'm definitely looking at safety and doing regular adversarial testing on that kind of thing. But there's also this greater purpose of ensuring that it really builds people's brains, that it's not de-skilling the student by doing too much for them, that it's taking a Socratic stance, that it's asking questions instead of giving answers, and that it sticks to those instructions every time. So it's this pedagogical frame and giving the technology a way to be a teacher and an effective teacher.
Ben's going to jump in, but I think that whole thing of not disproving, but ensuring the product counterbalances against the whole thing of the MIT report in regards to ultimately how it is disengaging and ultimately making learners be less creative and considerate and thoughtful in regards to that approach and just more prone to using the tool to get the answers and everything else. Is that kind of more where it sits then? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I think you broke up a little bit, but I think did you get the picture there, Rob, of where that was?
Yeah, absolutely. And that MIT study is an interesting one because it definitely proves that when you're using these tools to offload your thinking, that you end up becoming de-skilled over time. Like that MIT study that showed that in the fourth time that they did this essay, they actually were having a hard time using their own brains. And we've seen that also in other fields. Endoscopy, for example, uh, in in doctors, physicians who are detecting polyps through the use of AI, they stop for a while and then they've reduced their skill by like 6%. So it's very interesting to see this notion of cognitive de-skilling the more that we outsource our thinking. So in education technology, we must retain the human friction that is an enabler for learning and growth. So we can't outsource attention. We can't outsource critical thinking and reasoning. And we can't outsource those things that are just fundamental to how learners learn.
Now, most of the listeners will also be familiar with a lot of the work that I do currently. A lot of the conversations I'm having with organizations around the use of tech and AI in my day job is around developing that critical thinking conversation. And I know that we're going to come to that, or we were going to come to it. I think it absolutely makes sense to go there now, in that there is a lot of fear from educators, and understandably, and there's a lot of fear from students and parents that, like we talked about there, the advent and proliferation of AI being seemingly everywhere and every young person being able to have access to it, whether that's safe or not. And I know that you work with that space, but the proliferation means that there are some bad actors out in that space. There's a big challenge really around not just the data, not just the safety, and all them things will come up in a conversation, but actually how that de-skilling piece happens that you mentioned there about where's the thinking gone. And interestingly, I read one of the research papers on the School of AI website in preparation for this, because I'm interested in this. I'm interested in helping critical thinking happen better. How do we make sure that we use AI but don't lose the skill of being able to develop judgments and values and be able to make critical decisions around, how can I trust this? Do I know it's true? Do I not know it's true? How do I know it's true? And just because AI can do something doesn't mean it should do something, right? And so that how do you make the decisions around that? In fact, I was talking about that just this week. But there's a great research paper, hasn't there, that have been written by the team at School AI that talks about utilizing it effectively and efficiently and in a safe and well-considered way can actually improve critical thinking, not reduce it. In fact, was the stat 28%? It was up. There was a 28% boost in students, and this is the phrase, higher order reasoning, or the 28% increase in comparison or over a 2-year period. Like, how is that happening? Because the worry is that the critical thinking is disappearing because it's doing it for us. What are School AI doing in that space that's making that difference?
The answer is in design. It's actually the design of how the interaction happens. First of all, it loops in the teachers. The teachers create these spaces where students are doing this learning. And so they are aligning it to standards, which we prompt in the way that they create a particular space. I'll give you an example. Let's say that an 8th grade teacher is teaching some fundamental skills about biology. Well, they can attach standards local to their particular area that bring in the instructions of what is standard for that grade level, what kinds of things that they would need to have with the vocabulary, the kinds of thinking and reasoning that they need to do. So part of it is this idea of looping that teacher in, and we love our teachers because they're creating spaces very thoughtfully, and they're doing it in a way that actually encourages critical thinking. They can also create spaces that don't, that it can be just like quiz recall kinds of things. And so you can also have those by choice, but oftentimes our teachers are seeking for this interaction where it draws out more critical thinking. So I think that's the first part of it. The second part of it is around the design of what we call kind of our orchestration layer. We're not just a wrapper for one LLM. What we'll do is draw from all sorts of different LLM models through a layer of logic. So we can choose the best model for the task. And that's very helpful when you're trying to draw in greater power, greater insights for a particular interaction. And then the last part is in this orchestration layer, we give our LLMs instructions of how to behave like a teacher. So don't give the answer. Ask these particular kinds of questions. We say, instead of presenting like a menu of 3 options right off the bat, ask a question about what they're thinking. And so you get this interaction that is provoking students to use reasoning and judgment as they're interacting in this way.
And is that trying to ultimately develop and not lose sight of a real human-centric conversational style, coaching, that ultimately people always say, well, we don't want AI to be more like humans and all those kind of things. But I get it. But at the same point, like, also, you've never replaced the role of a teacher. Well, if you look specifically just into England, I'm sure this is a global issue in terms of retention and recruitment crisis in education, that ultimately it's not going to replace. There isn't enough of you anyway. So there isn't enough educators. So how do we make sure there is that bit of free before me, whatever you want to call it, or that coaching element, or that AI that will help facilitate some transactional bits, but also step in and support learning, because class sizes increase, there's less teachers, there is learning is still needing to happen. How do we make sure that AI is secure, but focuses on that human-centered environment and that centric approach to coaching and learning?
Yeah, and I think you've first of all, teaching, we know teaching is super hard. I remember when I was an English teacher and came home with a stack of 140 essays to grade independently, and having my like little toddlers running around while I'm trying to like fit in grading, and saving teachers time through efficiency tools is so important. And I think that's kind of this idea of like, can we ease some of the administrative burden, but then open up opportunities for greater connection between the teacher and the student, and then also to have these moments of learning that can be facilitated so the teacher can have visibility with certain proximity to certain students at certain times, while other students are getting greater attention through critical thinking interactions. Right now, I mean, if you look at a traditional school, say no technology, you'll have the teacher able to touch bases with a few students at a time. The other students may or may not be on task. And so this gives that kind of opportunity for that one-on-one scaling.
We've talked on the podcast and in essays and in articles for years and years and years about that Two Sigma approach, and actually the biggest impact on student progress is the proximity of the learner and the class size that pieces with that. And we've been saying, and we feel like we've been saying for a long time, that we've wanted that personalized tutor, that one-to-one tutor at scale for years and years and years. And now we've found some kind of technology that is able to help with that and to support that, and to free up teachers, the humans, the adults in the room, to do what they came into teaching for, to support that. Actually, not only it feels like a win-win everywhere. It feels like a win for people who can't afford for new teachers because there aren't enough of them and we've got a problem. It's for those that are already in education. It gives us those skills and those tools to get back to what really matters. And every learner in the room is starting to get something that is bespoke and personalized for them, rather than a teacher managing 30 students in a class or grading 140 essays. In fact, again, a lot of the listeners will be like, "You just tell the same old stories," like because I've mentioned multiple times on the podcast, the reason why I got into educational technology was because I was marking essays in my essays and feeling like I was writing the same things multiple times, and felt there must be a better way from this. And also I had a young kids who said to me, "Dad, why are you always marking?" And I felt to myself, there must be a better way than this. I needed to find a technology solution that would help me with comment banks at that point and online learning via Google Classroom as it was at the time. And I think what we've got here is this opportunity to really reshape where education could be. And I think dealing with that on one side, this many of us are super hopeful that this could help, not replace, but could enhance and augment education. Right on the opposite end of the spectrum, there's countries and many US states that are proposing legislation that's going to restrict or ban the use of AI in schools. And in the UK, there's currently a bill going through about what we do around devices and screen time for young people. And globally, we know these conversations are happening. So what do you think? What do you come to with that in terms of that dichotomy of all the good it could do, yet there's this move to try and quieten it and ban it?
Yeah, I mean, because we're parents, we don't want to think of our kids being plugged in all the time. I think that nobody wants that kind of education mindset. And I think that's where the fear is that, well, if we have more and more use of technology, then what we're going to see is kids just plugged in all the time. And we've seen some things like that when it comes to the access through, one-to-one iPads or Chromebooks or whatever, where students are kind of using it as a gaming kind of platform. Like they're kind of plugged in misusing the technology. I think, first of all, like responsible education technology should be outcomes driven, not usage driven. So, for example, we refuse to put streaks for logging in to our system because it doesn't matter. You can have a good learning experience, well designed from a teacher. That takes 5 minutes. You can also design stuff with the use of our tools that has 0 minutes of screen time. That's just more of an interaction that a teacher can manage and lead. And so we don't want to gamify usage and screen time as our driver. We don't think of that as like, you know, we don't think of that as kind of one of our measurables, our KPIs, right? Of like, how often are they logging on and using it? Because I think you can fall into these algorithmic approaches to just draw people back in. And with kids, that's not what we care about. I do think, though, that there's a risk in banning technology. There's a proposal out there for a 5-year ban on technology or of the use of AI in schools. I would respond to that by saying that the workforce is adopting and using AI at remarkably dynamic levels. And so to remove the smart technology that enables students to learn in a supervised kind of way is to remove from the classroom and from education what students are going to be accessing on their own independently. And when students interact on their own with an open kind of model on their phones or whatever, that's way more risky because it can produce that kind of parasocial attachment. It can really enable the academic dishonesty versus the kinds of things that we'd really like to see, which is deeper critical thinking.
Yeah, and I said this on a webinar the other day. We've done a terrible job with society, adults, young people with social media and technology. We are sleepwalking into doing exactly the same, but with a tool that is significantly worse and potentially impactful if not done so. And go back to years ago that there is no locker in life. Saying mobile phones are banned, let's be honest, the most amount of screen time that young people are having isn't in schools anyway. It's actually where they can leave the school building. And if we don't prepare them, support them to fail, to try, to be guided, during a time where it's actually an exploration and a learning phase, we say off you pop and off you go, it just really is not going to end well. And I just think this whole ban of this is purposeful use of technology and screen time if we do it right. It's not about just being plugged in all of the time. It's about actually how do we guide our learners, right tool, right job. And that might not be the technology at a moment, but ultimately the world is full of technology. We have to face facts and say, you know what? No, it doesn't belong in education. It's just the world. And we can look back with wonderful rose-tinted glasses about our history and our experiences as adults. But ultimately, the world is a completely different place. And we just have to face that fact of we need to support them in this world and in the future, not a world that as it died off in the 80s and the 90s. And I think that's how we prepare them and support them.
It makes me think. I love almost everything Singapore does in education, and they have from their Ministry of Education their approach to the use of AI. And the very first principle that they have is that they want their students to learn about AI, to learn with AI, and to learn to use AI. And I just love that framing because, yes, you have to understand that there are risks, and educating students to those risks is important. Also, the opportunities and how LLMs work and what AI even is. And then this idea, can we use technologies like school AI to be able to promote critical thinking and growth? And then the last part is this idea of like, can I use it to do things in the workforce, in my life, to have it enable human development and growth?
And tied to that, then, I suppose many of us, and I know that all three of us on the call now are not in the classroom full time anymore. And I said today in a conversation, I wonder if I would still be in the classroom if some of these features and tools are available. I don't know, maybe. maybe. But we get the privilege of working on education as well as in education and supporting what they do. So I do hear that. But there'll be many people listening to this and watching this who are like, okay, I'm not fully converted. I'm not thinking, right, we're going to have AI into every classroom or into everything. And I don't think anybody's saying that either. But we're trying to look at how do we create these environments that are centered around humans, human adults and human children, but also that are secure and safe and a place where risk can be measured. And like Steve said, that guardrails piece, we're not going to let every risk, but we're going to have agency regard. What do you think, and how do we create those type of safe, human-centered environments where AI can be used in that efficient and effective way, purposeful way that we've been talking about? What do you think some of the key drivers might be for people who are trying to explore this?
I think the clarity on what AI is and what it isn't is really important. If you ask we call it Dot. Dot is the kind of avatar that people interact with. But Dot is very clear that it is not human. Most LLMs will pretend to be human because that is helpful in their programming, right? We're deliberate about saying, like, I am an AI learning assistant, and just want to make sure that you know that from the outset. We actually, just a little while ago, Dot used to have a little face, and it was very cute. We actually invested in this marketing kind of like approach to having this really cute kind of interaction. We removed that at the start of this month and replaced it with a more abstract character and a more abstract shape. And then we added in ways to ensure that it's not pretending to be empathetic, that instead it's very clear about when to bring humans back into the conversation. Like, hey, what you've just expressed is something that I can't help with because I am not human. And so it's it's understanding the role of this assistant, that it is not human, that it has the propensity to hallucinate and to be biased. And so it needs that human connection and oversight and human in the loop.
The interesting thing is make it human then, because you just talked about bias and it can hallucinate. If you've ever asked the direction of a male in the street and he doesn't know where your direction, he'll tell you falsely anyway because he doesn't want to look stupid. I think it's that whole thing of ultimately we have programmed these machines and they are not human to be like us, and they've taken it from our context. It's a magnifying glass. But by changing it to a shape or a being rather than a human focused being, does that help try and drive that responsible use of that, it being a tool and a technique that they might use as a tool in a toolbox, that you don't always go to it, but actually it's key to help guide and perform those habits on a regular basis over a period of time? And how does that develop? What is the structure behind it and the thought process in regards to that innovation piece of the product that ultimately continues to drive that metric and that forward, in terms of not asking for a roadmap of what's coming next, but ultimately, how do you continue to drive that behavior and that product focus forward?
Well, because it's new and emerging technology, we want to be really careful about how we research it. So we're collecting really good information along the way about, what kinds of interactions are people having with the tool, and then being very thoughtful about our kind of ethical framework, which is first and foremost child protection. Like, you have to be sure that children are protected first and foremost, and then safety and security kind of comes next. And then we have bias and fairness in there. This is a frontier I'm really excited about. Actually, I don't want to tip my hand too much, but in the next little while, we are doing some things that don't seem to work in our best interest by slowing down an interaction. Like, for example, if you were to say, generate an image of a gifted student, the tool will, typically generate the image, right? And so it's going to carry with it the stereotypes that are in its training model. It's going to make assumptions that are based on probabilities. And also it'll echo things that you've done in the past. And this is any LLM, any model will do this. And so School AI is looking at a way to elicit more information through additional prompting. Like, before I generate this image, tell me what you're driving at. What's your purpose? Tell me the characters. What's the setting you're looking for? And if it still raises concerns, there's a teaching moment actually that is really interesting. Like, look, before I do this, you should know that this reinforces negative stereotypes. And I can do this as a counterexample, but just so you know, this is, what you can see. So there's some really interesting things that we can do to mitigate the natural challenges that we see with these tools.
Yeah, I think it's that pause function, isn't it? Again, in that training that I was doing this week, we were talking about thinking with AI and how young people probably need to think about AI. And the question I asked them to ask is not like which LLM to use or how to get away with using it, and that academic dishonesty that we talked about. I said to them about this can and should. And my question to them was, when you are considering whether you should use or can use an AI to do what you're doing, is there a pause moment that helps you go, am I going to lose something by doing this with an AI versus me doing it on my own? Is there going to be some challenges and trust issues and source materials that, like, for instance, if I were to use one large language model that might not have up-to-date data, or that's got biased data, that's not asked some of the questions that you need. So it's that ability for young people to pause. In fact, no, it's not just young people, right? I can work with leaders and adults, and I'm doing it as well, thinking to myself, right, okay, my answer is I'm just going to go into X large language model. I'm going to go into that thing and go, I'm going to help that. And what have I lost in not actually struggling and working through it? So I think there's loads in what you're talking about there that really resonates. And I think it's probably a straightforward answer to this question, but there's lots of nuance into it as well. But do you think AI is something that educators can ignore and just carry on as normal, or are we getting to a point now where we absolutely can't ignore it?
Oh, I think everyone in the world needs to pay attention to AI. It is such a disruptive force for all industries, especially any industry that relies on information. So I think we ignore AI at our peril, and also the rapid development of it and kind of the arms race, if you will, on how fast it's developing, how it's being adopted and integrated into different fields. So I don't think it's responsible for those of us who are equipping young people for a world that they're going to emerge into, to ignore what's happening in that.
I suppose this is a big question from a tech guy who works in a tech company who's leading it. But ultimately, it's a case of, I suppose, beyond your product, what does that good look like then in terms of that use case? And you as a leader rather than a learner, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis for you in terms of AI in your role in an AI company? How do you use it in terms of as an organization behind the scenes, rather than the tool that you're putting out? Actually, what does that look like for you in regards to the decision making, the support, the leadership, the automation, all of those kind of things? Because I worked with Google for such a long period of time, and Google is a heavy tech company, absolutely. And at times you look back and you expect it to be machines running the world behind it. And you look back and you go, why is there a hamster on a wheel? So are you a hamster on a wheel, or are you actually, is there AI running the whole company? And you're not even a real person, Rob. I don't know.
I feel like a hamster on a wheel. The way internally we've worked is to embrace and use and learn with AI. I think it's responsible for us as an AI company to also use it responsibly internally. And because we are a technology company, I think you'll see similar trends with what's happening in the broader industry, which is really strong programmers and designers are going to be using AI for a number of things, most frequently to produce early versions of products and tools and things like that. Um, there is the way to parse large amounts of data and to source really good information for whatever purpose that you're using it for. And we do that internally to source things. But I do think there's a way to define where the human really needs to live. And that's when, our engineers are going out into classrooms, talking to teachers, seeing how they're using tools, experiencing what it's like to be in a special education environment where students have varying abilities. And And that kind of thing is so human connected with our field and industry. We can't outsource that.
Absolutely not. And I think it ties into that conversation about should AI mark assignments. It's like that age-old question of like the thing that takes teachers loads of time is marking and feedback. Well, the argument is also, what do teachers lose in that mix if they're outsourcing and they don't know what students know, and they haven't got an understanding where there's a nuance or a lack of understanding, and all they've got is the AI's marked it for them, given a grade, given them a feedback. It's not saying don't use it for that. It's just how the outsourcing, and I wonder there, just as we're kind of coming into land with, and I know that we've got a couple of quick fire questions to come your way, but I wonder whether there is a real sense that we don't try and outsource the things that will still remain, and we've talked on that human thing, what the human things, what things will remain human in this AI augmented classroom. And I know that you've been doing research into this space, reading some of the blogs. What things remain human in that? Just to kind of land it, because I think School AI is an AI company, but actually I think it's a human company that enhanced by AI. I don't think that's what people. I don't think there are AI running everything, right, Steve? As we're looking at. So what do you think that looks like, Rob?
I think the way that it can be designed to retain friction. So the things that we ought not to outsource, and there's some really good articles out there about this kind of thing, which is we don't want to outsource memory, human memory, and human the ability to retrieve information versus just going to that other source to get that information. The idea of attention and being able to pay attention and to really think through things. And also that idea of challenging information in the moment. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think there are very cognitive and human processes that we outsource to our risk. And we want to encourage that friction to stay. And what you're talking about earlier too, about we want that to stay also with educators. The pause that I was talking about with image generation is a pause for educators. It's don't go with the first thing that gets kind of put back at you. Be more specific, be clearer about what you're looking for, and challenge that jump to conclusion.
So we always finish the podcast with 3 quick-fire questions. We don't share these in advance. Ben might be sneaking done that, but hopefully not. So I'll go first, then Ben, and then I'll finish up. So if schools were judged like restaurants by how much customers actually enjoy the experience, what do you think would change overnight?
I think it would be the sense of accomplishment at having done something hard. I walk out, maybe the metaphor I'm thinking of is more like a gym. I walk out having had a good workout, and I'm walking out feeling that sense of completion. That I think would be. Yes.
Eating something good as well. Yeah, I think we could definitely explore that one. The second quick fire is asking what myth do you think educators tell themselves to avoid real change?
The myth that educators tell themselves is that my students are actually doing the work. Oftentimes, educators are holding most of the work of learning in the classroom. So that, I think, is a myth.
If a 10-year-old asked you why they have to go to school, what would you actually say?
If a 10-year-old asked me why they go to school, I would say to experience people. To experience people that are not like you, and to learn and grow from them.
I love that. Do you know what? This is another person that's understood the assignment of quick fire questions. So thank you. It's like we didn't give them, and they were great answers that have been thought on the spot, and I didn't give them in advance. And I know that many of our listeners will already be very familiar with the work that School AI are doing, but we will be putting links in the show notes to some of the things that we've talked about, particularly around some of the research that we've referenced. And do, if you haven't already, check out what the team at School AI are doing. Look at how they are making those purposeful and conscious decisions about how AI is used in schools, not just trying to make as much money out of education as they can. I think there's real serious thought process in this. And interestingly, two of my friends, particularly the great Ken Shelton, who is over there in the US, talks so highly about what school AI do in comparison to others because of how conscious and well thought through and considered and purposeful is what you do. So if Ken acknowledges it and gives it his seal of approval, then that's good enough for me in most accounts. Rob, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your wisdom and the work that you're doing. Keep doing great things, and know that we'll be able to make some great connections going forward. For those of you who are listening who haven't yet booked on the Edgy Futurist Uprising, please do. 25th of June in Liverpool. You are absolutely welcome. We've got 16 awards, 17 awards, a few awards. We've got speakers. We've got community joining us from all around the world, and we would love you to be there. If you can be there, please grab a ticket while you can. It's been a pleasure. Rob, thanks for joining us. Steve, as always, thanks for joining us, and for it's been a good one. Take care, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you for having me.